Hello and welcome. So glad that you took some time to join me today and me sharing, I think, something very special. I don't think I've ever shared it fully before with anybody as part of Eastgate, and it's really been an honor to start sharing it. I was recently getting ready to go on a call with our powerful community family there in Australia, and I heard the Lord really clearly. I didn't know what I was going to share about, and I heard the Lord say really clearly that I was to share about my to be relational first, which is a just a hallmark of this movement and ministry that we're walking in together. So I wanted to share with you my testimony. I'm going to share the long version. I'm actually doing this right now in 2025. I'm doing this every Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That way, Australians and United States of Americans and Costa Ricans, Brazilians can all have access to it. So, I would like to start out with my salvation experience and help you understand where I'm coming from. So, as we get started on this next one, we make sure that we record it, you'll have access to it. First, I'm going to have some water. Very good. So, my born again experience was really radical. I grew up in a very, very destructive household. I was a middle child with a father who was never at peace. He was always plagued with what he calls our demons. And him and my mother always were constantly fighting. And so all I remember as a young man, a child, was experiencing the tumultuous and difficult lifestyle in that household. And so I didn't really, ever know anything outside of that. So I would come home in my early years around 10, 11, 12 years old, and I would always look to see how much alcohol was in that bottle in the refrigerator. And I would know, what man am I going to deal with when I come into the household? Do I need to run and hide in my room, or do I need to come and expect to be, loved and slobbered on? What was it going to be like for me that night? And this was very difficult for me. And all throughout my early years, I remember clearly this being a dynamic. And so I did not know God. We knew religion, but I did not know God. And it's so different. It's important to understand the difference. This is why I'm so big on encounter leadership, why I want people to understand experiential knowledge of Jesus Christ, how it changes everything. Experiential knowledge of God the Father and God the Spirit. And so in those days, I began to hunger for something that I never had. And I remember going to school and being the different kid and being beat up on and being harassed and being chased. And I would be chased home from the bus stop when I would be done with school every day. And I would experience these terrible things as a young man. And finally, I just grew tired of it. And I wanted to be free from the agony. And so in that moment, I actually decided that I would take my own life. And I'll never forget this, how clearly I considered all that I needed to do and how got the materials together to do this. And I remember straightening up my room and writing a note. And I remember what my bedroom looked like. I remember the feeling of walking into the bathroom and standing up on the toilet seat and putting the rope around my neck and looking down at the floor, the tile floor there, and sobbing with depression and sorrow and demonization and all the things that were occurring within me. I just wanted to be free from this torment that I was in. Right at that moment, shockingly, my mom comes charging through the front door, having gotten early from work, hadn't gotten off early from work that night. She comes running in to see what I was doing. And of course, I quickly become afraid. And I pull the rope down, and I jump out, I throw everything together, and I run into my room, and I jump onto my bed. And I remember the springs of that bed. And as I jumped on the bed itself gave, and the springs made a noise. And she came running in and opened the door and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just hanging out. It's Friday night. I'm just doing nothing, Mom. Don't worry about it." That's what I was thinking. And she said to me, "Well, I want you to go. This church is having this special youth function, and I want you to go." And I remember saying, "Fine, I'll go. I'll go to this place and with strangers, and when I'm done, I'll come home and I'll finish what I started, what you interrupted." I'll take my own life when I get back. And so I went to that church that night. They called it a lock-in. It was something that you do where you put kids in a big, auditorium, and you play games all night, hear the gospel, and you do all these fun games. Well, the time for the gospel came forward, and this fiery young, maybe 18 or 19-year-old preacher came forward and began to preach the gospel. But the way he preached the gospel was, let me introduce you to this Father that you may have never known. And when he did that, I was shocked. I was stunned. I began to weep and travail in the middle of this preaching about having a father. I remember wanting a father, needing a father. And so they couldn't even wait. I had to be pulled out of the crowd. The little young guy that came with me was watching me like, what's wrong with this guy? And they began to, minister to me, and they set me into relationship with Jesus. I didn't know much about Jesus then. I encountered the Father. I wanted that Father, and Jesus was the way to the Father, and that's what I wanted. And afterwards, I was completely different. I came home. I had a new lease on life. I was ready to live in a different way. And I got a Bible. They gave me a Bible, and I began to read the Bible. And that was 14 years old. And I began to hear the, the Father speak to me as I was reading the Bible. I began to hear the voice of the Father. And things were very difficult. I've actually found out later in life that same night while I was in the lock-in, my own mother, because of how terrible our home situation was, had a gun in her own mouth. The same night, she was planning to do the same thing that I was planning to do. And yet God set me free. And when I came home and she saw that, she was so thankful that she did not take her life. And we began to walk through a process together as a family. It was very, very powerful. And I'll tell you that later what happened. But I went back to school. The bullying didn't stop. The fighting didn't stop. The tumultuous experience didn't stop. But I did experience the love of the Father. I began to hear the voice of the Father speaking to me. And it was so strange as I was reading the Bible, and then I began to go to church. They would take me to church on Sundays and drop me off and leave, and then she'd pick me up after church was finished. And I would listen, and I had insight. And I remember several times the Sunday school teachers were amazed that I knew these things because Father was speaking to me. And that went on for quite some time. I went into high school, and I was still being badly picked on, badly bullied. And one day, out of the blue, my mother asked, I tended to have some music ability, and she said, well, why don't you consider joining the band? And I said, well, I don't know. And there was a flyer up in school, and I went, and they let you try some instruments, and I found a trumpet. Now, my name's Joshua, and so isn't that just perfect? And so in this moment, I took home a trumpet from the school and began to play. I speak to the Father, and I play my trumpet. And speak to my Father and play with my trumpet. And that was how I evaded life. That's how I got out. That's how I escaped. And because of this, I ended up going back to school at the beginning of the next year, having played all summer long, and ended up being the best trumpet player in the band my first year. And I went in and began to play trumpet and began to be known as a very talented musician. When I got into high school, that followed with me. Now, I wasn't free yet. I wasn't actively being discipled. I just had met God. I had known the voice of the Father, and experienced a touch from Jesus. And now I'm playing the trumpet. I'm hearing the Father speak to me, and I'm 15 years old. And every 15-year-old that I know, and back in those days, it was all about, how do I meet the girls? How do I have girls in my life? And so, sure enough, I got involved with all of that there in my first year in high school. It was a very difficult situation, very, very difficult situation. And I began to grow in my musical abilities. I began to grow in knowing the Father, but not being discipled, still having deep character flaws and deliverance needs and all those things. But I really wanted to know the Father. I really wanted to experience this talent that He had given me. So I went on through high school, did the things that high schoolers do. I was pretty popular, and I was playing, and I was being noticed for my musical abilities. And I was also reading the Bible and praying. There was a special place I'll share in the next time that we share on Tuesday morning, this special place called Green Cove Springs. And in Green Cove, I was able to go and hear the voice of the Father and pray for nations. I didn't even know what that was. I prayed for my wife, who I'd never met. And I began to call out to the Lord, and I'll share more about that later. But I went to a moment in time, my later in high school, where I was granted a prestigious scholarship to the best musical school in the nation for that particular type of music, jazz music. And they offered me a scholarship to come into the music program. But because I was doing so badly in school, I had to go into probation. I had to go to community college over the summer, graduate 3 classes with all A's, and they would accept me with a scholarship. And I did that. I was accepted. At the same time, I had received a letter that offered me to walk right into biblical education. And I really wanted to do that as well. I didn't know which one to choose, so I went to my pastor at the time, who was not spirit filled, who knew me, he saw me, but I went to him and I asked him, "What do you feel like I should do? I know I have the call of God on my life to minister, but I also have this opportunity in music." And he said, "Well, I think you should just go to music school, and that way you can fulfill that and then go to seminary, because that's what everyone here does." So that was my permission. I remember feeling like that was not good counsel for me, but I went anyway. And I went to the university and I began to get involved right away. I went over summer, got into some classes. Music started in the fall, met some people. They were part of a student ministry and began to build friendships. I was driving 45 minutes each way, began to build friendships, and they actually allowed me to come in as the student of freshman ministries my freshman year. I was the first one they ever gave the opportunity to actually be a minister as a freshman, because I had the fire of God burning on my life. And at this point, I was beginning to move with people, see salvation on campus, see things happening on campus, still attending that church. And the church where I attended, so I had a ministry at the school, and then I attended a church. And I became the youth pastor, or a youth worker at that time, with the youth, and just, part of the young people. And all of a sudden, things started happening that they couldn't explain, because they did not believe in the power of Holy Spirit. And they started seeing this fire on my life. So that's kind of happening at the same time. The student ministry is growing. I'm leading people to Christ. As a young man, I remember learning hypnotism with my mom. It was a coping mechanism that I learned. I remembered having high schoolers in my house, hypnotizing them completely, and then, taking control of their bodies and then getting them up. I was very gifted in that. I know why now. And then when I got born again, I ended up becoming the evangelist. So I had, high schoolers on my floor, under the power of God, receiving Jesus as the Christ, putting their trust in Him. And so now I'm at college, and I'm seeing this same fire burning at college. People are getting born again. There's miracles happening, but I don't even believe in miracles. I don't even believe in Holy Spirit, having a relationship with Him. But there are things happening that are unexplained. So this is happening at church now. This is happening at school now. Something really amazing happened then. I was in a music scholarship, so I had to practice. You had to practice every day so that you could just compete with the other musicians. I remember 8 hours a day I would go in and practice. But what would happen is, as I would practice, um, I was getting worse. I was practicing more, but my skill level of when I entered the program was actually going down. This became an issue for me. I have all the success in the ministry. I have people getting born again, people being baptized in the Spirit, and but my musical abilities are decreasing. So because of that, I tried to figure out what was happening. I tried to come to terms with what was happening, and lo and behold, what happened was my music director asked for a meeting, called me into a meeting with him. And in this meeting, he began to speak to me about my obligations, having received a scholarship and having, being at the best school at the time for this type of music. And I remember him saying to me, and this was my first supernatural encounter, he said to me, "I want you to share what you think is going on, because you're getting worse, and I've never seen this happen." And I was going to answer him, and he goes, I don't understand, just like this. I don't understand. When he put his finger out, time froze. His finger was out, his jaw was open, and he said to me, uh, he was frozen. And all of a sudden, a voice, that same voice, the voice of the Father comes crashing into the room, and he says, how long will you run from what I've called you to do? Get up. Leave this program now. And then all of a sudden, mouth was open, finger was out, and time caught up. And he said, it seems like there's something more important to you than this. And I looked at him beginning to cry. And he looked at me shocked, like, what just happened? And I reached over and I grabbed my big folder of music and I passed it to him and I said, there is something more important for me than this. I said, I'm going to leave the program now. I quit. And he said, please don't quit. You can't quit. If you quit, he said, if you quit, you're going to lose your scholarship. Your grades will tank. It's already past the drop period. All your grades will become F's. You'll never get into school again. You're going to lose your money. You'll lose everything. Don't quit. And I got up and I said, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I walked out of his office. I directly, before I lost any of my boldness, I walked across campus and I went to the music or the Office of Academic Affairs, and I quit and dropped all my classes, 8 classes or 6 classes, and they all became F's immediately. They handed me my college transcripts and I resigned from that school. When I walked out of that office, I was just amazed with how I felt. Felt free, but I also felt terribly remorseful over having to do that. And somehow I had joy, but I also had mourning. It was like joy and mourning at the same time. And I was like, Lord, you've got to show up and tell me, did I do the right thing? And I'm walking out to my car. Again, I'm tearing up now because this is real to me. I just let go of my dream. And I'm, on the way to the car. And I'm like, Lord, you have to speak to me. Did I do the right thing? And my phone in my pocket begins to vibrate. And it was the pastor calling. And this is what he said to me. He said, I heard that you feel you have the call of God on your life. Is that true? And I said, yes. Yes, I feel like it's true. And he said, well, I want to give you the opportunity to prove that over the summer, because we were still in summer at this point. He said, I would like you to become my student pastor over the summer. And I would like you to work with our young people and see if the call of God on your life is real. And I said, yes, I accept. And in that moment, I had just left. Wasn't even in my car yet, and had been offered a position in ministry. It wasn't full time; it was part time ministry. But in that moment, I stepped into a position. We started with 4 young people in a house. Never forget it. Within 3 months, I had 125 students experiencing the best version of revival that I had ever seen. At that point, getting saved, set on fire, coming into right relationship with one another, their parents. I developed a student council of parents that worked with me. I did not want to lead alone. I led with parents, and we saw amazing things. And about a year into this journey, a little less than a year, I was leading the summer camp and doing all the things a youth pastor would do, getting a very meager salary, sleeping back at home. I lost my dorm, went back to home, slept on the floor in my parents' house, and I began to see the most amazing things. I remember one time specifically, I shared this with the Australia crew before. One time specifically, I went to talk to my youth one day, and I heard the sound of a skateboard going down the hallway, on the concrete floors. And I was trying to preach and teach, so I got irritated about this concepts I was getting. And so I went out the door, stormed out, and said, hey, you, get in here. And took this kid, got him into the classroom. I said, sit down there on the front row. And he sat down, all black. And I preached for 20 minutes on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I look over, 20 minutes later, this kid is sobbing, and he receives Jesus Christ. His name's Stephen. He's preaching today in the nations. And I had moments like that, filled with that. And I was having the time of my life. I knew that I was called by God. I knew that He had called me. I knew that He had chosen me, appointed me. And it wasn't my choice, it was His choice. Because to me, the night that I was going to commit suicide, I did die. I died that night. And so I went on with the young people, and one day, suddenly, I'll never forget this very clearly. I woke up, and I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and I looked, and I had this sore spot on my neck, and right there, and it was so sore to the touch. I said, "Wow, what is that?" And I just went on with my day. Well, a couple of days later, this place on my neck now is the size of a golf ball, small ball, and I'm getting worried. So I call and make an appointment with our family physician at the time. Parents still, you know, at odds, but now working on their marriage. They never divorced, thank God. And I went to our family physician, and I was on the table. I'll never forget this. They were walking in, looking at me, looking at it, poking it, and the doctor walks out and he leaves the door cracked. And he says to the nurse, "I think this might be non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." He said, "I need you to go in and prepare this young man to take a biopsy of that tumor and to see if this is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." Well, he left the door open, so I heard everything. You know, isn't that great? Fear filled me, and the nurse told me, we're gonna have you back next week for a biopsy, and I went on my way. I went home. When I got home, I was so upset because was serving the Lord, and all these things were happening. I couldn't believe it, and amazingly, um, they began to call everybody, and we weren't spirit filled, so it was the worst case scenario, and I was faced with fear, true fear. And so I went to my room and I laid down on my mattress on the floor and I began to cry out to God. I was alone, and I said, "Lord, aren't you going to heal me? Aren't you going to heal me? Aren't you going to heal me?" Finally, that same voice came and he said, "Hey, you remember that?" This is exactly how he said it. He said, "Hey, you remember that missionary group that came through, that was doing ministry in the Catholic Church, and they were, doing the liturgies. They were playing music, and then they'd offer special concerts, and you'd go, and they'd preach the gospel and evangelize within the Catholic Church." He says, "I want you to call those guys, and I want you to go travel with them." And I said, "Lord, like, did you hear what I said? I have. They say I have cancer." And he said this. He said, "If you'll go with this group," he says, "I'll heal you. If you say yes to me, I'll heal you." They never said I had cancer, by the way. Just said, "I'll heal you." I said, "Okay. If you heal me, I'll say yes. I'll go." Next morning, I wake up. The lump is entirely gone. It's completely gone, miraculously gone. Well, I'm a young man. I'm 18 years old, 19 years old now. 19. Don't know anything about anything, and I forget about my promise to go, and I go back to preparing my lesson for the week, calling the young people that I was worried about, and I'm just gonna go, and I'm gonna, be a youth pastor. I'm gonna go, and at this point, I'm starting to see people be healed physically, which I could not explain. We did not believe in, and I'm excited about life, and I'm gonna go, and the next day, I'll never forget this. So I have one day, I'm healed on one day. I go back next day. This is on like a Thursday now. I go in, I wake up in the morning, and the lump is back. And then I'm really repentant at that point. I'm like, "Lord, please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I told you that I would go, and I didn't go. Please forgive me." And immediately the Lord, um, healed me. The next day I woke up again. This is a Friday, and I'm healed. I wake up healed. So I get on the phone and I say, "Hi," in my phone. I said, "Hi, I'm calling to see, do you have any openings for trumpet players on your missionary teams for the summer?" And the lady's like, "Well, just let me look 1 second." And she begins to look. Never been on a plane before, never done anything before. She's like, I have one for next March." She says, "But the funds are due," I think it was March. "The funds are due next week." And I was like, "Well, how much is it?" She said, "It's $4,000. Now, this is 1999. $4,000 for me, a part-time youth pastor, was a lot. So I said, I felt the faith leave me. And I said, okay, thank you. I said, but then that moment, I remember feeling, I've got to say yes. I said, I'll be there. I'd like to apply. She said, let me send you the documents. You can apply. Make sure you have the funds raised. They're due Monday. And I was like, okay, yes, ma'am, thank you. She emails me all the documents. So I immediately on Friday call my pastor. I say, Pastor, I have to travel. I have to say goodbye to the church. I have to go to the nations. God says I've got to go to the nations. I have to go. No question. So the Lord, the man says to me, I think you're making a big mistake. Can we have lunch? So we go to lunch, and I begin to explain to him what I'm feeling the Lord say to do. And he is not on board because the Lord doesn't speak today, basically in his belief system. And I said, I got to go and I got to travel with this team. And I said, and by the way, I have to raise $4,000. And I said, can you help me? Can you give me permission to go? He's like, well, if you really think this is your call, we're going to hate to lose you, but I will. He's like, the program's doing so well. We're growing. He's like, there's families are being healed and put together. We're growing. There's over 100 kids now. It's been a miracle. It's amazing. All these families coming in. He says, if you really feel like this is God, Will bless you to do it. But I think you're making a mistake. And I said, okay, well, thank you for blessing me. He says, and I'll also do the following. He said, I will say something at the end of service on Sunday. Remember, money's due Monday. He said, I'll do something at the end of the service where if anybody wants to sow into your trip, he didn't say sow, give towards your trip, I think so I said it. I'll let them give towards your trip. And I said, okay. Well, Sunday comes, I have zero money, and money's due on Monday. And I go to Sunday, and they bring me up before the church at the very end. They're like, we hate to lose Josh. He's such a blessing to our church. He's so great with our young people, but he really wants to go do missions. It's 3 months of missions work over the summer. He's going to go into the nations for the first time, and we need to pray for him, and maybe if you feel led, come up and maybe give him some money if you have some to sow into his trip. Well, suddenly, no one expected it. In other words, can't get my words together. A man stands up in the back. Never forget, his name was Ryan. Stands up, has 2 young people in his life. Ryan stands up and he says, hey, I have a question. Now, you didn't do that in those kind of meetings. This is not a meeting. This is an announcement. He said, and everyone was shocked he did it. He stood up and said, hey, I have a question. And the pastor was like, yeah, what is it? And he said, I have a question. He said, I want to know, he said, Josh has been pouring his life out here. We've seen such incredible testimonies from the young people. We've seen such incredible growth. Why don't we, as the church, just send him to the nations? And the blood left the pastor's face. He's like, well, we don't do that here. We don't do that here. We can bless him, we can send him, but we can give towards it, but in order to send him, we would need a unanimous vote. And literally every person, without anyone asking, every person in that church, at this point it was over 200, stood up to their feet and began to clap and unanimously voted for me to receive the $4,000 that was due on that Monday. And I was completely funded in 10 minutes for that trip. So this began the journey for me going into the nations for the first time. I was completely funded, and I went into the nations for the very first time. And it was a miracle trip. And when I come back and share next time, I'll talk about what God did in that trip and more. Thank you.